Recently, I met with a business owner who had made a very tough decision. She had decided to fire a family member, and actually, it was an uncle. He had been working with her for a couple of years, and she determined it was just best if they parted ways. And she asked me, she said, Lou, how do I go about doing this? How do I go about firing a person, a family member? How do I go about firing my uncle? He'd been with me for a few years. And, I've talked to business owners in the past. I find that sometimes we just, as a small business owner, you're going to hire a family member because, there's lots of reasons, trust being one of them. Maybe you're hiring them for a skill or maybe they just need a job and you're able to provide that job. But regardless of the reason that you hired someone, when you fire them, if you have to fire a family member, it is very difficult. So what I did is I shared with her some tips, some things that I'd learned over time about firing a family member. I've been fortunate. I had both of my daughters work for me at one point. Both Corey and Katie worked for me, and they did a great job. I never had to worry about firing a family member. But again, I did work with people who have. So I've learned some tips. And what I'm going to do now is share them with you in this episode, how to fire a family member. And that is up next. So whether you're firing anyone, whether it's a family member or whether it's not a family member, it's important to remember one thing, and that you are affecting their life. Yes, they're affecting your business, and that's why you made a decision to fire them. That's why you made a decision to let them go. But it's just so important to remember that you're affecting their life, and when you think about that, you want to have some compassion. I've worked with people, some business owners, and they go into the decision, they go into the meeting, they know they're going to let somebody go, and they pump themselves up and they get excited, and they go in there and they just sit down with them and they say, hey, I got to let you go, it's not working out, please pick up your final paycheck with the bookkeeper, and see you later. I've seen people do that. I've seen people terminate someone, let them go without really understanding that you're affecting somebody, you're affecting their life. So you've made a decision to let someone go, but you don't have to be cold, you don't have to be cruel, you don't have to be matter of fact. Just remember, you're affecting their life. You made a decision, it's the right decision, so carry it out. But do it with some compassion. Do it with some understanding. Do it with an understanding of how they're feeling. There's a separation here. It's almost like a divorce. And when it comes to a family member, I think it really is similar to a divorce. So tip number one is be compassionate. Don't go into the termination meeting, the firing. Don't go into it cold and cruel. Go into it with at least some understanding that what you're doing and what is affecting somebody. But in the back of your mind, know that you are making the right decision. Now, this is another tip, and I'll call this tip number two. And I just said, go into it with some compassion, with some understanding. That was tip number one. Tip number two is a little bit similar and almost seems as a contradiction. But you do have to go into the firing process with no emotion. You can't be emotional. And when I say no emotion, what I mean is you can't be a mirror. If that person gets angry, you can't get angry back. Understand the situation. But don't be a mirror. Don't reflect how they're acting. If somebody's angry and they look at you and they're like, how could you do this to me? How could you fire me? I'm your family member. I'm your uncle. I've known you since you were a little kid. People they're gonna pull out all the stops. They're gonna, and I understand that. You need to understand that. But don't be a reflection. Sit back and listen. Try to be like that, like a Yoda, and I guess that's just an example. Wise, understanding, but don't be emotional. That only fuels it, and it carries on the conversation, and it can take it into a direction that you don't want to go. So don't show emotion. Just be compassionate, but don't reflect. That is so important. Tip number 3 when it comes to firing a family member, and this is one that I think is very, very important, and that's to be honest. I mean, a lot of times a people, a business owner, and I've talked to many, including myself, because over time I have had to fire people. I've had 100 people working for me at one point, and certainly not everyone works out. You've got to go ahead and you've just got to let them go. One thing I did learn, and I have learned, again, whether it's a family member or not, is be honest with them. People are going to see through it. You could say, well, I'm going to let you go because, there's too many people in your department. I'm going to let you go because the expenses are too high. But when you do that and you go ahead later on and you're, within a week or two, you're replacing them with someone else, they can see that and they're going to find that out. I find it's best to just be honest with somebody. If I'm talking to you and you're my salesperson and you're just not selling them, that's fairly easy. I can say, you're not hitting the numbers that we expect from you, so I've got to let you go. But if it's a bookkeeper or maybe it's a designer that you have working for you, and I had a chain of business publications at one point. I've had many graphic designers work for me. I've had writers working for me. Of course, salespeople as well, and support people. But you know what? It's not as easy when you're talking to somebody, about letting them go. But you got to be honest with them. Whether they're coming in late every day and that's not acceptable, or whether or not they're producing as quickly as you expect. Whatever the reason is, just be honest. Let them know, I'm letting you go for this reason. They could come back and disagree, and as I said in the previous tip, don't bear reflection, but be honest with them. Just be honest. It's a learning experience for them. It's also actually a learning experience for you when you're doing the firing. So be honest when you're talking to somebody, when you're letting them go. This is why I'm letting you go. Don't bring a lot of other things into it. This is why I'm letting you go. And at the end of the day, I truly believe they'll appreciate your honesty. I think I alluded to this in a previous tip, which is to, stick to the topic. And that's a really key point. And whenever you're having a discussion with anyone, actually, but when you're terminating someone, and if it's a family member, stick to the topic. They might come back and say, number one, you're going to say, I'm going to let you go. I've got to let you go. This isn't working out. And you give them the reason, of course, like I said, be honest. But that person, the person you're speaking to, your family member, or again, it could be anyone else that you're letting go, they could change a topic. They could say, well, I know that Sally didn't like me. My supervisor didn't care for me. Or they could say, you've never liked me. Since you were a child, you never liked me. Well, don't even go there. Stick to the topic. Joe, there's nothing else that is involved in my decision. Or Sally, this is a decision that I needed to make. This is a decision I'm making. There's nothing else is impacting my decision other than this. Don't deviate. Don't go off topic. Don't fall into the trap. And a lot of people will do that when you're talking to them. They'll bring in some other thing. Like I said, they might say their supervisor didn't like them or you didn't like them when you were little. Or they might even come back and say, well, you know what? My child is sick all the time. When you hired me, you knew that I had a child that was going to be sick and I had to miss time. That's all well and good. But, stick to the topic. The topic is, I'm letting you go for this reason. And that is so important. Don't deviate. Don't go off topic. Stick to the point. That's very key in any time you're letting someone go. Now, here is a very valuable tip when it comes to firing a family member. And that tip is, do not talk to anyone else other than the person you're speaking to, the relative, the family member you're speaking to. I've been in meetings and I've heard of conversations where someone will say, well, you're firing me. I'm going to talk to your aunt. I'm going to talk to your mom. I need to talk to my cousin. I need to get their feedback. I need to see what they think. If you do not want to talk to another family member. So if I'm firing a family member and they say, well, you know what, let's talk to Aunt Sally about this, or let's talk to Uncle Mike. No, this is between you and me, and it's going to be a discussion that we have. So if another family member asks me about this conversation, about the firing, or about the reasons why, I am not going to say anything, because this is between you and me. And I've seen this a few times. I've seen where a family member will say, I need to talk to another family member, and I'm going to have them call you. No, do not have them call me, because I won't talk to them about this. I'll talk to them about anything else they want to talk about, but I'm not going to talk to them about your employment with me. This is between this employment and this decision to part company, this decision to terminate you, is between us, and it's not between us and no one else. Now, this is probably the last tip, and there's many other things I'm sure that I could think about, and I probably will think about when this video is over with. But the one thing that I've learned when you're firing anyone, when you're letting somebody go, and again, whether it's a family member or not a family member, is make the landing as soft as possible. And by that, it could mean a number of things. Make it, give them a couple weeks, severance pay, or a couple months severance pay, or whatever you can afford. So some kind of monetary cushion is always helpful. But don't think, though, that if it's a monetary cushion, don't think that that's going to make everything all right. It's a little bit of salve on a wound, but it's definitely not going to make it all right, because this is going to linger. Their feelings are going to linger. They're going to be some hard feelings for a while, and what I find is it depends on how long they work for you. If somebody's working for me, a family member's only been working for me for a month, well, you know what? Probably letting them go, they probably see the writing on the wall, and they probably knew that it wasn't working out. But if somebody's been working with you for a couple of years, it's a lot more challenging. And it could be the feelings, the hurt feelings could linger for a while. But getting back to the point, which is, make the landing as soft as possible. Financial, some kind of financial help, payment is going to be a little bit of, like I said, salve on the wound. So financial, maybe helping them to find another job. Say, I'll make some calls for you. I'll help you. I'll give you a good reference. I'll do whatever I can to see you get another position, another good position. And I find that is sometimes more helpful than money, although certainly, money is going to help them. But being willing to get on the phone and call someone on their behalf and say, hey, I've got a great employee for you, or if they're not a great employee, I've got an employee for you. And try to help them in any way you can. That's really the point. But make the landing as soft as possible. So if you can help them get another position, great. Maybe it wasn't just a good fit with you, but they could be a better fit somewhere else. And I find that can be true most of the time. It's just not a good fit for you. It's not a good fit for them. So that's my final tip, which is make the landing as soft as possible. There's no reason not to try to help them. Again, I go back to the beginning here, beginning of this video. You're affecting someone else's life. So help them. Be compassionate. Be understanding. Don't, as I also said, don't reflect any anger. Make the landing as soft as possible. You want to try to keep a good relationship with them if it's at all possible. And by making the landing soft, by helping them get another job, giving them some money, what you can afford to do, those are two key things that will help. And those are things that I recommend anytime you're letting someone go. So I've just shared with you some tips on how to fire a family member. It's obviously, as I said in the beginning, it's not an easy decision to make. Letting someone go, a family member especially, is always going to be challenging. You're affecting their life, you're affecting their livelihood, you're affecting their family. But I want to make it very, very clear. When you make a decision to let someone go, you're making a decision because you know it's best for the company. You know it's best for you. You may know it's best for the other employees. So firing a family member or firing anyone, you've got to do what you got to do. So do it. But you don't have to do it in a cruel, as I mentioned, a cruel way. You don't have to do it in an uncaring way. But you need to let that person go. And I just gave you some tips that I know have been helpful to other people. When I've had, whether I had my publishing company, whether I had my trade show business, whatever I've done, I've always tried to be compassionate, tried to be understanding. Most of the time people don't understand it when you're letting them go, but a family member, it's a lot more difficult. This is Lou Reyes with Over 50 TV, where we provide business and career advice for people over 50.